Prepare in the desert a way for the Lord. Make a straight highway for our God across the wastelands. Let every valley be filled in, every mountain and hill be leveled, every cliff become a plateau, every escarpment a plain. Then the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all humanity will see it together.
Unexpected changes of scenery, reverberations of color, bursts of light on bare rocky crags, chalk cliffs, boulders smothered by wind or split by temperature fluctuations, stony riverbeds of dried-up streams. The desert of Judah extends east and southeast of Jerusalem as far as the Dead Sea, its millenary legacy replete with biblical references.
So I brought them out of Egypt and led them into the desert. I gave them my laws and taught them my judgments, in whose observance people find life.
Even in the Old Testament, the desert or wilderness has always had a particular significance. The patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived in the desert wilderness, and the episode which, more than any other, marked the history of the elected people was the exodus of the children of Israel through the wilderness. 40 years across the desert from Egypt all the way here to the Holy Land. In that period of time, the experience of the chosen people was that God always showed concern for them, even in this hostile environment where life seems almost impossible or in any case very difficult. Later it was the prophets who spoke of the wilderness as a place in which God's Spirit manifested itself in a particular way. In the wilderness, rivers would flow. A road would be built, a way through the wilderness, along which the exiled sons would return.
Then Jesus was led by the Spirit out into the desert to be put to the test by the devil. He fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, after which he was hungry. And the tester came and said to him, "If you are Son of God, tell these stones to turn into loaves." But he replied, "Scripture says, human beings live not on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God."
Jesus withdrew for 40 days into the wilderness, immediately after his baptism in Jordan, and before he began his public ministry right here in this desert in the region of Jericho. Here he was tempted by Satan, but overcame this temptation. Christians subsequently wished to recreate this period of Christ's life in the wilderness, and in the Byzantine period, a large monastic movement formed here. Monks, primarily hermits, retired here, desiring to imitate this aspect of Jesus' life. Thus, the wilderness may also become, for today's Christians, a place for experiencing God, where the Christian learns that God is truly concerned about us in an environment that seems so hostile to life.
Then Jesus came from Galilee to Jordan, to John, to be baptized by him. John would have prevented him, saying, "I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me?" But Jesus answered him, "Let it be so now, for thus it is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness." Then he consented.
Along the course of the Jordan River, where the Israelites touched upon the promised land, where Elijah concluded his earthly experience, Jesus asked to be baptized and went into the water. He who needed no purification, as a gesture of complete solidarity with humanity. A favored destination of the faithful who, since the dawn of Christianity, have here renewed their baptismal promises. The banks of the Jordan today are difficult to reach because the ceasefire line of 1967 coincides with the river's course. Each year, on the last Thursday of October, the custody of the Holy Land promotes the traditional pilgrimage to the Jordan River, including a celebration of the Eucharist and sprinkling with water taken from the river.
And when Jesus had been baptized, he at once came up from the water. And suddenly the heavens opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and coming down on him. And suddenly there was a voice from heaven, "This is my Son, the Beloved. My favor rests on him."
Amal Terrace, a mixture of limestone and clay set between the desert of Judah and the northwest shore of the Dead Sea, 400 meters beneath the level of the Mediterranean. Khirbet Qumran, derived from the Arabic Khirbet, ruins, and Qumran, perhaps Gomorrah, after the name of the nearby wadi. For 2,000 years, in the tomb-like silence of an arid and barren landscape, in caves hollowed out of bare rock, documents considered to be amongst the most important archaeological findings of the past century waited to be rediscovered. The site of Qumran, where we find ourselves at present, has been known since antiquity as a rich source of manuscripts. Evidence dating from the Byzantine period tells us that manuscripts, perhaps biblical in nature, were found in the vicinity of Jericho. In April 1947, a young Bedouin shepherd who was chasing a goat that had wandered from the herd discovered the cave later designated by the number 1. Several scrolls wrapped in linen were found among earthenware jars. The survey and excavation campaigns carried out in the 1950s led to the discovery of another 10 caves containing various types of documents in varying conditions. Though in many cases only a few fragments remain, their value is inestimable. There are 11 caves, some hollowed out of the mountainside, some at the sites adjacent to the ruins, where we are right now, and texts of different kinds were found. Biblical texts in particular, which represent the most sizable part. Texts that actually reproduce almost 100% the text we have received from other sources. Texts of the community which give us an insight into what life was like in this place, and apocryphal texts regarding books of the Old Testament. We can see that it was a monastic-type community, that is, of people living together who adhered to strict religious observance. They were a group within the sphere of Judaism, a strictly observant group. They engaged in ritual baths twice a day. They worked together, and in the evening, for a third of the night, they studied the scriptures.
The many shall spend the third part of every night of the year in unity, reading the book, studying judgment, and saying benedictions. This is the rule for the meeting of the many.
Life in the community went on for around 2 centuries, just over 200 years, starting from around 200 BC until Christ's time. From an archaeological point of view, we can say that the site was sealed in the year 68 AD, when the Romans arrived here on their way to Jerusalem for the conquest that would take place 2 years later. The biblical texts are important because they show us that the Holy Scripture was a living thing. The Holy Scripture was the daily bread of the members of this community. We may wonder why we bring pilgrims here today to visit these ruins. Pilgrims are brought here precisely to rekindle in them the love for the Holy Scripture that was present among the members of this community. Like the members of the community, the pilgrims to the Holy Land must have respect for the Scripture, as it was handed down to us by previous generations, and at the same time, they must have the courage and the strength to make it relevant to their life today.